Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. This incident was relayed to me by my cousin. She works in the outpatient section of TTSH. Please note that the TTSH hospital I'll be writing about is the current, newly built hospital, not the old one. That night was as usual. She was getting ready to go home when one of the nurses there asked if she wouldn't mind checking some paperwork before she left. So, she decided to stay for a while. The checks didn't take long. She managed to finish the paperwork before 6:30 p.m., the time when the janitor would come to lock the doors of the respective outpatient sections. As she was happily walking towards Novena, she realized she had forgotten her wallet. She rushed back to the hospital, hoping to catch the janitor before he locked her section. As she ran frantically down the corridor toward her clinic, she saw the janitor locking the door. She shouted for him to stop, telling him she had left something behind. For some reason, he ignored her. She kept running toward him, shouting. Finally, as she was about 3 feet away from him, he turned toward her and smiled. What she saw freaked her out. The janitor's face was hideous, and his skin looked as if it had been eaten away by thousands of maggots. Before she fainted, she heard him say, "Did you forget something, my child?" When she regained consciousness, the real janitor was looking at her. He asked her what had happened and explained that he was a bit late that day because his son was sick. He helped my cousin up and then told her never to walk along the corridors again after 7 p.m. He never explained why, and I don't think my cousin wanted to know either. The following is a story based on a true incident at the hospital where I work. I had a patient a few months ago who was transferred to my ward from the ICU. When the patient arrived in the ward, she began to tell us, the staff around her, what she had experienced earlier in the ICU. The incident occurred around 1 a.m. during the night shift. Patient X had been sleeping soundly but suddenly woke up. She opened her eyes and noticed someone dressed in white, with long hair and bloodshot eyes, staring at her. She was frightened by that pair of red eyes, as the figure was simply staring at her without doing anything else. My patient quickly closed her eyes and began chanting some prayers. Another patient, Y, in the room next door, also saw the lady standing by patient X's bedside and was curious as to why there was a visitor so late at night. Y called the ICU nurse to ask about it. After hearing this, the nurse looked into patient X's room and saw the lady as well. She decided to inform the visitor that visiting hours were over and that she should go home. The nurse opened the door to patient X's room and entered, only to realize that there was no one there except the patient. The nurse then approached patient X and asked, "Where is the lady who was just standing here?" Patient X was so scared that she just cried out. After she was transferred to our ward, she continued to have a high fever for several days, but the doctors couldn't determine the cause. The above story was told by the patient herself and verified by the nurse who had transferred her up to the ward, the same nurse who had seen that mysterious figure. There was always a rumor circulating in the hospital that something was inside the building. Of course, most stories were dismissed as products of the imaginative human mind. But how do I explain this story? Here's a tale about a certain hospital. In this hospital, patients frequently complained of being disturbed in the middle of the night. They reported hearing loud knocking that woke them up, and some even described feeling as though they were being pinched by thin air. After some investigation, it became apparent that all of these complaints were linked to a particular location. All the complainants had been warded in a specific area, which we'll call Ward A. Initially, the disturbances seemed harmless, but over time, the complaints became more intense and troubling. Eventually, the hospital had no choice but to close down the ward. However, one doctor volunteered to stay in Ward A for a night before it was officially shut down, to see if he could experience anything unusual himself. He prepared himself for the night, seated in his bed in Ward A with the lights still brightly lit. He read a book he'd brought along to keep himself occupied. Around 9 p.m., he yawned, and something seemed to move in the far corner of his eye. He glanced over, expecting to see something, but saw only the chair and a decorative painting on the wall. Relieved yet slightly disappointed, he sighed. At 9:30 p.m., the ward lights were turned off. He switched on his reading lamp, which was positioned above his head, and continued reading. By 10 p.m., he had grown tired of his book and decided to retire for the night. Leaving the light on, he drifted off to sleep. Around 10:30 p.m., a slight rattling sound woke him. He looked over and found the noise had come from the chair on his left. Oddly, he noticed a slight pinching sensation on his arm. Making a mental note of this, he settled back down, attributing it to a passing disturbance. But by 10:50 p.m., he was awake again, feeling that the light was keeping him from fully resting. He reached up, turned off the light, and returned to bed. At 11:10 p.m., he jolted awake, with a sense of dread churning in his gut. Something felt wrong. The chair, which had been on his left, was now positioned directly in front of his bed. In the dim moonlight, he could make out a dark figure sitting in the chair. This sight brought him to full alertness. Now fully conscious, he became aware of a low mumbling sound, directed at him. Turning his head back to the left, he saw several dark figures staring at him. Unlike the one in the chair, these figures had red, bloodshot eyes, and more were emerging from the painting on the wall. Startled, he let out a scream. The shadows stared back, their faces empty and hollow. Overwhelmed, he fainted. Following this incident, the hospital sealed the ward and eventually brought in a priest to remove the painting from the wall. Once the painting was taken down, it seemed that everything returned to normal. People say that hospitals are some of the most unclean places in the world, and I can't disagree, especially after I personally experienced something strange. After my O-levels, I was accepted into a course at a polytechnic, and I decided to work for 6 months before starting. A job agency helped me find a position in a hospital's material management department. I was responsible for delivering all kinds of equipment to wards, operating theaters, and offices, from medical supplies to office stationery. Here are some of the incidents I encountered. The lift incident. At that time, the hospital wasn't fully open yet, only the ER and some ICUs were operational. One day, I made my rounds to the PsyCU to deliver supplies. I pressed for the lift, and when it came, I pushed my trolley in and entered. I pressed the button for B2, where my department was. The doors closed, but suddenly they opened again. Thinking someone was outside, I peered out, but no one was there. I pressed the close button again, and the same thing happened. This repeated 4 times. A chill ran through me, and I stepped out of the lift. The doors closed, and it went down without me. I thought maybe the lift sensors were acting up, so I waited for another lift, which finally came and took me to B2. But what happened next shocked me. As the doors opened on B2 and I pushed my trolley out, the lift on the left, the same one that wouldn't take me, opened at the same time. Out came 2 attendants with a metal coffin, the kind hospitals use to transfer the deceased to the morgue, followed by the deceased's grieving family. I was chilled to the bone. For the rest of the day, I felt sick and uneasy. Was something in the lift waiting for the arrival of the dead? Was that why it wouldn't let me go down? The ward incident. A month or 2 later, my supervisors decided to send a group of us to Alpax Hospital, which had already closed down, to retrieve anything that could be salvaged. Only 2 people worked there, a father and son security team. On the first day, I felt as though the hospital was surrounded by a dark aura. The only working lift smelled of disinfectant and decay, and it often got stuck between floors. Most of the electricity was out or cut off, adding to the eerie feeling typical of abandoned buildings. One day, a colleague and I were assigned to count the metal bed frames left in the hospital. We decided to start from the top level of the main building and work our way down. Around 5 p.m., we reached the 2nd floor. We unlocked the ward door with our keys and entered. It was a Class C ward with rooms separated by partitions, each without doors, connected by a long corridor. I was counting the beds, while my friend recorded the numbers. 7 beds. Okay. 10 beds. Okay. Then I reached the second to last room. I peeked in, but continued to the last room. 8 beds. Okay. But my friend reminded me, you didn't count the beds in the second to last room. How many were there? Then it hit me why I hadn't counted them. In that room, I had seen something unsettling. It was fully furnished, with mattresses and pillows on each bed, looking exactly like a functioning hospital ward. And sitting on the first bed near the door was an old man in a hospital gown, staring directly at me. 8 beds. Oh my God, let's go. I grabbed my friend and hurried out of the ward, avoiding a glance at that room. Outside, my friend thought I was being lazy and lightly smacked me on the back. I told him exactly what I'd seen, and he scolded me further, saying that if someone sees something unclean, they shouldn't tell others or else the bad luck will pass on to them too. To this day, just thinking about it still sends chills down my spine. This is a story about my encounters at NUH. NUH is located near a forested area. I am a staff member at NUH, working normal shifts, and on that particular day, I was on the afternoon shift, which ended at 10 p.m. My office was on the 6th floor of the main NUH building, facing the forested area with large trees and a staircase leading up the hill. When I look out my window, I can see NUS to my right and a small road lined with parked cars. It was a normal day for me. My fiancé would always wait for me on the 5th floor staircase that leads up to my office. There is a door on the 6th floor by the staircase that requires a staff pass to enter, so no outsiders are allowed. The corridor outside my office is always very creepy, and if I turn to my right, I can see the forest again. Like on other days, I walked as fast as I could and never looked to my right. When I reached the door leading to the staircase, I pushed the button to unlock it, but unfortunately, the button didn't work, and the door didn't open. I called my fiancé and asked him to come up the stairs, because I was very scared. There's a small window on the door, and I could see him walking up the stairs. While waiting for him to reach the door so he could help me, I don't know why, but something made me look toward the forest, which I never did before. I saw a white figure with long hair looking directly at me from somewhere among the trees. I told myself it was probably just my imagination. Then, suddenly, it moved. It looked like it was floating. That's when I realized it was real. And that was it, I started panicking. I was lucky that it didn't come in my direction, but I could feel my heart racing, and my legs felt like jelly. I was breathing rapidly. As soon as my fiancé reached the door, I started crying and told him I needed to get out. He told me to calm down, and about 5 minutes later, while we were waiting, a technician arrived, probably because they saw us on the security camera. They fixed the button, and I was finally free. It was a terrible day for me. Fortunately, my office has since moved to the 1st floor, closer to the A&E, which is definitely safer for me and my colleagues. When I was admitted to Tan Toxin Hospital for appendicitis, I recalled a horrifying tale told by one of the Indian Ammas who came into the ward where I was staying to clean. Out of boredom from being in the hospital, I befriended her, and she shared an incident she had encountered at the old Tan Toxin Hospital, where she used to work. The old Tan Toxin Hospital, as we knew it, used to be quite creepy, with lots of big trees. The lights were dim, and the pathways were rather spooky, unlike how it is now. One night, this Amma was pushing a trolley along one of the sheltered pathways leading into the building. On the left side of the pathway stood several tall, imposing trees. The sheltered pathway itself was dimly lit, making the whole area look eerily desolate. At that moment, the Amma suddenly noticed something moving among the trees. Whatever it was, it seemed to be darting from one tree to another at top speed, in a strange, almost playful running motion. The Amma stopped and tried to focus her eyes on that area, staring intently. Finally, she caught a glimpse of a figure. It looked like a man. He seemed to be holding a fan, similar to the type people use when fanning sauté as it cooks. But the strange thing was that he had an incredibly long pair of legs, about twice the length of normal human legs, and he appeared to be playing peekaboo with her. Disturbed and frightened, the Alma abandoned her trolley and ran away from the area. She later asked someone else to retrieve the trolley. The Alma recounted the incident to a security guard, who explained that it was probably a Hantu Gala, or pole ghost. It was unclear if the figure had meant any harm. Another experience I had was when I was working in one of the wards and had to work until 9 p.m., and that's when the eerie part comes in. There was a particular patient who liked to sit or lie on her bed, staring blankly at the fan above her. My friends and I were curious about what she was looking at, so we observed her from afar. Maybe she realized we were watching her, because she turned and looked at us with wide eyes. We quickly looked away, and when we glanced back at her, she had returned to staring at the fan. Maybe there really was something there for her to watch. Another story is from when my friend and I were doing our rounds to check if the patients were snugly tucked into their beds and sleeping comfortably. There was one patient who couldn't sleep, so we ended up talking to her. She pointed outside the window and asked us, "What is that?" My friend and I looked out the window, but we couldn't see anything except the next building of the hospital. We told her it was just another building, but she shook her head. She insisted there was something else there that was bothering her. She complained that she couldn't sleep because of it. We were shocked, but fortunately, it was nearly time for us to sign out. We told the patient not to worry about whatever she saw and to try to go to sleep. She refused to sleep and kept looking out the window. We then tucked her neatly under the blanket and left her. I asked my friend if she had seen anything, and she said, "No, me neither." Then what was it that the patient had seen? Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.